Hello, and thank you for joining us. A few days from now, on May 1st, Nashvillians vote on a much-anticipated proposal to change how we move around in this city. The transit plan has a multi-billion-dollar price tag, it's ambitious, and it has a lot of components. As voters figure out their positions on the transit plan, we here at NPT sent out an open invitation for a discussion about the transit vote to anyone who wanted to participate. Those who accepted are here in our studio audience tonight, and you'll hear from many of them in just a little bit. And we'll also hear from our Facebook community. First, let's start with a look at what the proposed transit plan includes. This is how the referendum will look on the May 1st ballot for Nashville voters. But the 55-page document that backs it is filled with narratives, graphs, and photos detailing Metro's proposed transit improvement program. The stated goal is to reduce traffic congestion in the city, which most agree is bulging with growth and development, fueled by a soaring population increase in the region, as high as 100 people a day by many reports. In a nutshell, the transit plan has three objectives: improving and adding to bus service, constructing 5 new lanes of light rail, constructing an underground tunnel and transit station underneath downtown Nashville along 5th Avenue. If the referendum passes, the most immediate changes to transit would be upgrading the bus system, installing new digital signs at bus stops, incorporating ride-sharing programs to get people to bus stops, and installing Wi-Fi on the buses. The plan also touts several byproducts if it's implemented, like boosting the economy, providing more jobs, and improving pedestrian safety. Almost each of those pluses is challenged by opponents. They say the proposal puts too much into light rail and will disrupt city life and businesses for years due to construction. But the main dispute between proponents and opponents has to do with money. The transit plan's price tag is stated in the referendum, just under $5.4 billion to build everything in the plan, and almost $9 billion to do the build and operate the system for 15 years. The divide is playing out in print and on the airwaves.
Our current bus system will be improved drastically.
Half the cost is going to be paid from people who do not live here. And that's a good thing.
And it's a lot more economical, especially for seniors.
We cannot afford to wait.
The price tag is over $43,000 per family over the life of the plan. 4 separate taxes will be raised, and Nashville will have the highest sales tax of any major city.
And at the 11th hour, a handful of new counterproposals for improving transit in Nashville have been announced as the backers wait for results from the May 1st vote. The tit-for-tat continues among all sides, but their lanes merge on this. Nashville must do something soon about its growing traffic congestion. So, this is a printout of the 55-page transit plan. How many of you have read it? Raise your hands. Okay, be honest. Okay. How many of you have already decided how you're going to vote? Whether you're going to vote for it or you're going to vote against it, you've already decided. You have to tell me how you're going to vote. Just have you decided? Raise your hands. Okay, all right. If you haven't decided how you're going to vote, what is it that's holding you back from making a decision? What do you need to know, or what's causing you confusion? You didn't raise your hand. Do you mind telling us?
I think I know how I'm going to vote. I have major concerns about the price tag and about what it's going to do to our city in terms of debt and whether the whole plan can be completed or not, and what that'll do to the various areas of the city that get it or don't get it.
Okay. Anyone else who hasn't decided? Tell me why you haven't decided, because we're going to try to get some answers tonight for people who are unsure.
Just like most people, I'm interested in the cost of it, but I do have a concern about the Metro Rail that's downtown. Can we justify the need for that? And maybe if we aren't going to need that, can we take those costs and maybe put it towards something else?
When you say the Metro Rail,
tunnel,
the
the
tunnel,
rail
the
thing.
tunnel downtown is what you have concerns about, and the cost of that.
Yes.
And
Is
whether it can be distributed
is there
elsewhere.
going to be, are there going to be enough people using it? And if not, then why spend that money, put it elsewhere where we need it out in this, farther areas?
It seems to me that we have, really our problem is not a lack of having a transit system, it's a lack of ridership on what we have and building on that. And without a doubt, I think probably everybody, the way that the proposal or the vote is written, it's all or nothing. There's no staging, there's no accountability that I can see. There's the budget has said it's estimated at a certain cost, but okay, what if it's double that? Well, we voted to do it. I don't know what the answer is on that. Maybe I'll find that out. But where we are is that I believe that everybody would be for the stage one if we could vote on that. And then, but then if we had some triggers or something that had with ridership or accountability that would trigger these actions in the future, I think it'd be much more acceptable proposal.
So that's where you get stuck after stage one, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's take a look at what stage one is. These are the 8 major components: frequent transit bus network, access ride and mobility on demand, that's geared towards the seniors and people with disabilities, light rail transit, neighborhood transit centers, that's the places where you stop and wait for the buses, they're going to be improved. Crosstown routes, that's a big one for a lot of people. Now, if you want to go crosstown, a lot of times you have to go downtown and get a connector. Rapid bus transit, revised downtown, that includes the tunnel. Ma'am, you brought that up. And commuter rail, which I think primarily refers to Music City Star. There are people here tonight who helped to develop this plan and might want to clarify some of the things that we've heard are causing confusion. So I see you, Mr. Bland. Would you like to address this gentleman's concern?
Steve Bland, Chief Executive Officer for the Metro Transit Authority. An important thing on the ballot initiative is this came about after the culmination of about a 3-year planning effort between Nashville's comprehensive plan, Nashville Next, and the Metro Transit Authority and the Regional Transportation Authorities and Motion Long-Range Strategic Plan. And where some of the high-impact, high-capacity corridor investments like light rail and commuter rail came about is after engaging with about 20,000 Middle Tennesseans, the overriding thing we heard is that we need to make a network that is faster, yes, but even more important, more reliable. People understand that with the growth, we can't necessarily get everywhere as quickly as we do today or as we did 10 years ago. What people find frustrating is if it takes me 30 minutes today, 45 minutes tomorrow, an hour and 10 minutes the day after. And one of the things that light rail and rapid bus in particular offer, and the most important feature of the downtown tunnel, is that regularity of travel. What we see today on the Music City Star between Lebanon and Nashville is it runs at about 97.5% on time. That is a way better percentage than I-40 at rush hour. I can guarantee you that. That's the main feature of the high capacity network that I know a lot of folks have questions about. But clearly, LaTanya, everything else you've spelled out is an important component of the overall plan.
Well, I do want to address his concern because why is there so much at one time? I think what I heard him say is, could it be more like a cafeteria style or, phase one and let's get that right? And why put all the elements in the bucket right now?
Well, again, coming back to what Middle Tennesseans told us about travel time reliability. So, for instance, improving frequency of the existing bus network will be critically important. It will be a very short-term upgrade, as will extending service hours on the existing bus system. But that will be primarily a huge benefit for current riders because that bus network is still going to be in traffic with everybody else. So
I tell you what, I'm going to interrupt you real quick because I'm a visual person. I imagine there are others who are. We have a graphic of the map. Let's pull that up and show the complete map with all the corridors.
So if you take that core map and those blue and green lines, which include 28 miles of light rail, including about 1.5 miles of the downtown tunnel, the green lines, which are about 25 miles of rapid bus, that forms the backbone of a system that is extremely reliable in terms of its travel time, will be faster as traffic increases than what you can do in a car. And then the rest of the system kind of builds around that. So whether we have frequent bus service on many of our corridors, the crosstown routes that you referenced that many people are asking for, the mobility on demand, so working with the rideshare operators, feeding into that network to get not only to our congested downtown core, but through it to better connect our neighborhoods.
Everything I've heard so far is how we're going to address all the traffic in town. And even, I think the ads or something I saw on the news said it's not going to reduce traffic, it's just going to keep it from getting worse. There's a tremendous problem with our interstate traffic. What is this going to do for if you've been on 440 or 65 or 24 or any of the interstates at 430, none of this light rail is going to help that, is it? Because these are on the interstates. So it's great for people getting from one part of Nashville to downtown and back, but what about everybody who is on the interstate at rush hour?
Hi, I'm Erin Hefkinschill. I'm Director of the Mayor's Office of Transportation and Sustainability. I think the question was a little bit about the regional component. So as Steve talked about, this really started with the N-Motion plan, which was a regional plan. And the Improve Act, which you were mentioning, requires that the referendums happen on a county-by-county basis. Mayor Briley meets with the regional mayors on a monthly basis. He actually was just meeting with them on Tuesday. And the vast majority of them have expressed interest in doing their own similar referendums if we're successful on May 1st. It would be sort of silly to start a train in Murfreesboro and have it end at the Davidson County line. So you do have to start it in the core of the city. But I think a couple other comments that I would make on where these corridors are. The vast majority of them are in what we consider the same corridors with the interstate. The Music City Star is in the same corridor with I-40. The Murfreesboro Light Rail line is in the same corridor as I-65. So they are in the same corridors, and people can choose to ride the light rail instead of being on the interstates. But the other thing,
to get there.
Yes, they do have to get there, and I'm getting to that point. Where the system is proposed for this first phase is in the area of town where we have the highest density of jobs and population. 76% of Davidson County residents will be within a half mile of transit, and 89% of all jobs. And the jobs number is actually the most important because people usually are more willing to drive to a park and ride, get on the train as long as they can walk to their job once they get off the train. So that proximity to jobs is really crucially important. People, you know, as we've been having these conversations, we both through N-Motion but also sort of across the country, we know what some of the best practices are that attract riders: longer service hours, increased frequency, faster travel times, the reliability of the travel times. And those are all elements that are inspiring these plans. But it's a little hard to think about it from phase 1 to phase 2 because they're all components. It's like having a diverse portfolio of transportation options.
Well, then I'd like to ask about this map, and you, if I understood you correctly, you said the transit corridors are accessible to 89% of the county. Is that correct?
They're within a half mile of 89% of jobs in Davidson County.
Okay. What about folks in Bellevue and Donaldson and Antioch, those places where I don't think these lines go?
Donaldson has a Music City Star station. The frequent transit network that serves Antioch also will have frequency improvements. There are 2 park and ride locations in Bellevue, just to name a few of the examples that you talked about. But a lot of the places you mentioned also are less dense than some of our urban core neighborhoods. So there's many more people that are in walking distance of those urban core corridors. And it would make more sense for people to be accessing the service in Access Ride or with our mobility on demand options if you get a little further out of the county.
Okay, so those folks could access the line through the mobility on demand. Anyone have any comments about that explanation?
I have a question about the Music City Star, which I think is great. But I don't know what the current numbers are, but at one time there were only like 3 trains in the morning and 3 trains out. Is that different now, or is that that's not really solving that big of a problem?
And for folks who aren't familiar, the Music City Star is our commuter train. It's a 32-mile line that begins in Lebanon, Tennessee, and runs into Riverfront Station, right down really at the front of downtown. Currently, the Star carries about 1,200 riders a day. As the gentleman indicated, there are essentially 3 inbound trips in the morning rush, 3 outbound trips in the afternoon. Number one request we get is for more trips, midday trips, evening trips, weekend trips. That is a component of the Let's Move Nashville plan, at least in the Davidson County portion. We would be having all-day service into the evening with 30 to 40-minute frequency during rush hour, 1 hour frequency in the midday, 1 hour frequency in the evening, and also service on the weekends. The Music City Star for the Regional Transportation Authority, even though Wilson County and the I-40 corridor are smaller markets than, say, I-65 South and Williamson County, I-24 and Rutherford County, and even Vietnam Vets and Sumner County, by far the Star carries more riders than any other corridor in the RTA network. And again, what we hear from Star riders is it's that reliability of travel time. And if you want to see people who are really kind of cruel in Middle Tennessee, go to Riverfront Station in the morning when the Star pulls in, when there's been an accident on I-40, and you will see people getting absolutely delighted that they beat their neighbors downtown by about 40 minutes.
Okay. So. I think there's a lot of high tension around traffic these days, no matter where you are. This lady here in front wants to say something.
I'm not emotional about the transit system. I'm practical about the transit system. I'm a pragmatist, and I look at research. My concern is I've not seen any research on the population from the Environmental Protection Agency, the Health Department, or the U.S. Corps of Engineers. I've not seen any research on developmental practices, soil conservation. I've not seen any research on eminent domain and how are you going to take inner city properties. I'm concerned, and I've been to Nashville Next meetings, I've been to community meetings, and on all of the panels, not one of our government officials who have the job have been on a panel to explain the whole process. Now, on my emotional side, I think it's wonderful. We need transportation. I've not seen statistics on the numbers of people currently using the system and how you plan on promoting more usage. I'm emotional, but I'm practical. Help me understand where my money is going. And I know David, and I knew Megan, but it's not making sense to me. The dollars and cents are not adding up to our constitutional rights of health, safety, welfare, and disclosure of how our asthma, our hearing, our respiratory distress, our PTSD, and any other symptoms that we're going to struggle through with blasting.
Have you decided how you're going to vote? You don't have to say.
Oh, yes.
You have decided.
Yes. I would like to change my mind, but I need more information.
So
I need research.
I'm assuming you're voting against.
I am going to exercise my constitutional right to keep my vote private.
Okay. Yes. Yes. There were a lot of clues in that comment.
There is no conversation about the environmental impact of all of this. I mean, we assume, I guess, that we're getting people off the road, so that's going to be a positive. But I haven't seen anything or heard anything about the issues that she's brought up.
Okay.
I'm resonating a little bit with the issue related to eminent domain. There were some very specific areas, and I understand it probably based on the percentages that were indicated earlier, but where are the transit stations? Has there been some kind of working agreement already in motion with people?
Literally where they are, or you question where they are?
Well, I see on the map some specificity, and I'm wondering, I can't help but wonder about where's it going to be in that neighborhood, and how is it going to be obtained, and what is that going to impact? How is that going to impact neighborhoods and individuals?
Okay.
I'm John Summers. Yes. I used to be a councilman. I also served in the first mass transit study, and I consider myself a supporter of mass transit. But there's a secret to this plan that really hasn't gotten much discussion, and that's the transit-oriented development districts. A state law was passed at the same time this was passed that gives broad authority to MDHA to be able to set up corridors as much as a half a mile, quarter mile on either side, all along these transit routes, gives them the power of eminent domain, gives them the power to set the land use policy, What we're going to see, instead of having 2- and 3-story buildings along these corridors, we'll have 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, whatever the development industry will build. They'll be able to get financing, tax increment financing through MDHA. So I think one thing that both sides agreed is that we do not have the density in Nashville. We are not New York City. We are not Chicago. We do not have the densities to support these light rail corridors. And so it's going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy in that we're going to see more and more development pushed through to be able to support this transit plan. And quite frankly, you know, the neighborhood activists in our group are really concerned that this is going to have a really devastating impact on our established cities.
I'm Sam McCullough from East Nashville, and I have several concerns, one of which the rail station is located on one of those maps at the corner of North 6th Street and Main Street. Main Street being one of the corridors that it will run through to the Gallatin Road sector. I went to one of the meetings over at East High School, and I asked the young lady, this corner here, is that what you all plan for, a station? And she said, yes. I said, well, that corner is 601 Main Street, which is First Baptist Church, East Nashville, and is on the National Register of Historic Places. Plus, that's my family church for over 100 years. There's a lot of concern with it, with MDHA having that much leeway into the neighborhoods, the gentrification that's already going through these neighborhoods that are right off of Main Street, right off Gallatin Road, Dickerson Road. It's almost unaffordable now. A house on the corner, 4 doors up from me, is $609,000. So the few people we have left in the neighborhood, it's going to be a challenge, property tax-wise and everything else. With the price that it's going to saddle people, especially those who are living in low-income jobs, the tax alone in 24 months, 10 cents on every dollar, that adds up. We're already in food desert area over there, so.
To talk about the transit-oriented development district, the first one that we're talking about is in the Donaldson area, right around the Music City Star. And that actually is within, there's already an urban design overlay in Donaldson, and the transit-oriented development district that we're talking about is actually within the boundary of the UDO. So just because it says a quarter mile in every direction doesn't necessarily mean that's what the planning department and MDHA are going to decide. We're going to work with the communities to determine the best way to move forward. I've been giving transit talks all over the county, and it usually is at neighborhood association groups, and a number of the neighborhood association groups that I've given presentations to usually have somebody from the real estate market there that talks to them about their value of neighborhoods, of their houses in the neighborhoods, and there almost always is a report about tall and skinnies and the pressure on our residential neighborhoods with tall and skinnies and this type of growth and development. One of the reasons we're having this conversation is because when we had the Nashville Next conversation, people told us that they wanted to concentrate our growth in the urban core, concentrate our growth along transit corridors so that we could preserve the character of our residential neighborhoods and preserve rural open space in the county. Nashville is growing really rapidly. There's 1 million people that are going to be moving to our region over the next 25 years. If they continue to move further and further out of the core and into our surrounding neighborhoods where every trip requires a car, that's going to be crippling congestion for our region. So being able to focus our growth along these corridors, done in conjunction with the community, is going to be a really important way for us to grow intelligently as we move into the future. And I'm just going to add one more thing because it's about affordable housing. The tax increment financing, which is the tool that will be available to us as part of the transit-oriented development districts, will allow us to have a certain percentage of TIF financing that will be dedicated for affordable housing. As most of the people in this room know, we've tried a number of tools to be able to have inclusionary zoning in Davidson County, and it's been overturned by the state. So we're limited in our tools to be able to have more affordable housing. And this is going to be one of our most powerful tools to ensure that there's affordability along the transit corridors.
Is there any way to give some specifics around that? Like, are there designated areas for that instead of just saying the money is there?
Well, the other thing that Mayor Berry started when she was here and Mayor Briley is moving forward with was the Transit and Affordability Task Force. And that was led by former Mayor Bill Porcel and County Clerk Brenda Wynn. And they convened a whole number of community groups to come together, community leaders to come together and make recommendations. And one of the recommendations that they had was that we need to do an inventory along all these corridors so we have an understanding of the type of housing that's in the corridors before we get started. And then we need to set ambitious goals for affordability along those corridors and make sure that we have the tools and the resources to be able to meet those goals.
So those are steps before these centers will be implemented.
Yeah.
Mr. Bland, is it possible that maybe there are some things that would clarify some of these concerns, but they just haven't gotten out? Because I heard Erin say something that would alleviate some concerns in her last comment, saying that, before we do anything, we're going to go in there and do studies, whatever, but I'm not sure that has been
So the maps
communicated.
you have up are conceptual. There are no specific locations designed. And frankly, one of the things that has been frustrating and disconcerting is there are opponents of the plan who are using this as a scare tactic. I've gotten calls individually from...
Clarify what you mean.
I've gotten calls from property owners saying, your dot on your map is on my property. Are you taking it? Somebody told me you're taking my property. Absolutely untrue. Okay. To date, the transit centers that we've been working on have been in collaboration with community agencies. So for instance, we're working with Tennessee State University on a potential center in North Nashville that would be on and adjacent to their campus. We're working with the Metro Nashville School District with their reconstructed Hillsborough High School on a potential site at their campus.
So what about what Mr. McCullough said, though? Someone specifically saying it's going to be at the church at 600 May.
Anyone who told you that was not affiliated with the Metro Transit Authority or the mayor's office or MDHA or Metro Planning or any of the consultants to any of those groups. Because I would think Erin and I would know something about that.
Okay.
So that's a complete untruth. Not sure who told you that, but it's not in the plan.
So these dots then are estimated
They are conceptual.
positions. Okay, they are conceptual.
And
so
what I
no
would
one
tell
should take
you-
it literal when they see a dot that looks like it's close to
So
their
a good
neighborhood.
example of what you're talking about in the MDHA process is what MDHA is doing in Donaldson right now. And they've had a number of neighborhood meetings. And a lot of those are centered around neighborhood visualization of what do we want to occur here? What is the type of development we want to have happen? That's been a very engaged process trying to build consensus, and there's certainly disagreement within neighborhoods. If this moves forward in any of those corridors or for any of those sites, the first step is what we refer to as pre-design, where we meet very specifically with neighborhoods, businesses along the corridor, homeowners, residents, obviously through our Metro Council folks kind of leading that effort. So this is very much a community engaged effort. Has been from the very beginning, and it will continue to be up through design, construction, and commissioning of systems. And again, what's been disconcerting for the calls I get, because people are afraid, is that it seems to be the result of misinformation that's getting out there from not sure who.
You've mentioned that you're going to meet with neighborhoods, but at some point, you got to put the lines down.
Right.
What happens then if the neighborhood has said, I'm not sure about this?
Well, we work closely with all of our neighborhoods to design services and to design improvements, and that's a consensus. Look, this plan isn't something that the mayor's office cooked up or the MTA cooked up. This came from you. It came through Nashville Next, and it came through NMotion. LaTanya, you'll remember when we did this very same
I
format
went to some of the
through
discussions.
NMotion.
I think where we are now is all those discussions, and you all did a great job of hosting them all over the place, has boiled down to something that I think people are still not sure about and may have some confusion around.
My name is Jeff Obafemi-Carr. I'm a senior advisor for No Tax for Tracks, and I'm also a lifelong Nashvillian, and I'm also a transit user. My son is in Metro schools. All four of my youngest are in Metro schools, and my wife and I use public transportation, and we have been users for life. The ridership has always been really, really low. I talk to people too, and there's misinformation that goes out on all sides. And when people are out talking in conversation and they're not getting information that's tangible, it makes them unsure. What I hear in the neighborhoods that I go into are different things. We look at the map and we say transit is covering everything. But when we look at 70% or more of the money being put into the light rail system, and people being concerned that light rail is inflexible and does favor real estate deals and development to build density, then you look in Bordeaux, you look in Bellevue, you look in Southeastern Antioch, and you say, well, what do we have? We get enhanced bus service, truly. But when you look at the price tag on this of $9 billion or possibly more, the map basically tells you that downtown density is the goal here. And we've heard that talked about. Ashford Hughes, I think one of the mayoral assistants, said that this is the largest economic stimulus package in the history of Nashville, and that was acknowledged. So when people hear that kind of talk, they say, well, why is it that the lion's share of the tax money that's going to be raised from 4 different sources, from a regressive sales tax that we all agree, all experts agree, has a disproportionate effect on the poor, the elderly, those on a fixed income, and those who have to pay sales tax. If the energy is going into primarily antiquated technology that has not been proven to be effective in comparable cities, then in essence downtown is getting train investment while the rest of the neighborhoods get the bus and the tax bill. And that's where the confusion comes in, and that's what we hear from people who, in a city of 687,000, don't feel that the 18,000 and some change that were part of the in-motion process represents them. What Nashville asked for, and what we've heard repeatedly as themes over the last 5 years, we've heard 2 things. We've heard we want affordable housing, and we've heard we want traffic congestion relief. And when I talk to people, they are convinced somehow that this is going to provide congestion relief. But as traffic experts will say, none of the proposed transit centers are in alignment with the interstate or with exits, so there's no access for park and ride there. So when we talk about the lack of specificity, and we actually read the 55 pages, it's quite interesting when we find words like may, could, possibly. So when you have a plan that depends on a philosophy of if you build it, then perhaps people will start riding it. It's too high a cost to pay for something that scientifically does not alleviate what Nashvillians wanted, and that's the actual traffic congestion.
Okay, I'm going to get some more comments, but let's talk about cost, because we really haven't gotten there, and the program is moving along. Let's go to the second paragraph of the referendum, because the referendum is 3 paragraphs. It's not 55 pages when you go to the back. And the second paragraph literally states the cost figures. Present day value to build, $5.4 billion, and the estimated cost through 2032 of almost $9 billion. One of our Facebook commenters, Lynn King, says county by county doesn't work. If a county bows out, Davidson is stuck with the bill and the poor outcomes.
This plan has been represented almost like there's a gun to our head. If we don't do something right now, we're going to be in terrible shape in a few years. There's nothing else but this. But there is a plan B. I went to their meeting. Plan B people, now, when I was invited to that meeting, I said, look, if this is just going to be vote no because it's too much money, I'm not interested unless they have alternatives. But the Plan B people had alternatives. They were talking about the city leasing for 3 years 1,000 microbuses that people could use, kind of like they use Uber, and I've never used Uber, but I have an idea of how it. You'd call in advance, or you would text in advance if you know when it's going to be, but there would also be some microbuses available for people who just realize, oh, I got to go downtown, and I don't want to get stuck in traffic. Now, I'm not saying that that's the alternative. What I'm saying is there are a myriad of alternatives out there, and this seems like it's being rammed down our throat as it's this or we're going to become Chicago. I think that there's something in between, and I don't think that that's been presented to us.
There are several plans that have popped up in the proposals, I should say, that have popped up in the last couple of days, as you mentioned. One person on Facebook, Joe Fareed, I think it is, Says, I'm wondering if the plan properly takes into account technological change during the next 10 years. For example, technology plus good planning might allow for much greater ride sharing, where each vehicle could average 3 people. Self-driving connected cars are also on the horizon. We've heard about that. Anyone else have a comment about? Let me go to this side of the room.
So with these other plans and the availability of these plans, can somebody explain how that would work as it relates to dedicated funding and how those things could come into effect? Because I'm under the impression that this initiative is on the ballot, and we get to vote for this opportunity to start a process and create the funding mechanism for the process. So I'd just like to explain a little bit more about that.
Well, and the other plans are proposed, but I don't even think they've gone before the council. So, I mean, that's not on the ballot May 1st. But if someone wants to address her question, Erin?
One of the comments that I want to make is that there are, again, Steve and I are out in the county giving lots of presentations, and half the time when we're in the county, some of the people want an all-bus solution. Half the time we're in the county and they want more light rail lines, and they want the light rail lines to be extended further out into the county. So I think for people to think that we ever are going to go through a planning process and come up with a solution that 100% of people want, it is just not how planning processes work. N-Motion and Nashville Next were based on months and months of engagement, best practices from across the world. We know that light rail works. There are 24 light rail systems in the United States. Light rail ridership across the country is up 20% over the last 10 years. We know that when you have dedicated lanes, which this alternative with a whole bunch of buses running around in mixed traffic wouldn't actually be a competitive option to driving, so very few people would choose to use it. So we'd actually have more cars on the road than less. So I think that there's, we've heard lots of input from the community, and there were 3 options that were proposed as part of the N-Motion process, and we're moving forward with the next phase of trying to achieve dedicated funding to be able to move forward. And it's not about, you do bus or you only do light rail. Each of these options makes sense in a different part of our county. Light rail makes sense on our most congested corridors. Rapid bus makes sense on other corridors. When bus service further out in the county makes sense in those places, but we also will have opportunities to extend it. It's not a one-fit solution. We're a 533 square mile county. There's going to be different things that work in different parts of the county, and we've looked at the best practice from across the country to figure out where that makes sense. Technology absolutely will help us serve some of our more suburban and rural parts of our county and be able to connect it to our high-capacity corridors.
Okay. Thank you very much, Erin. And there was a lot of work put into the N-Motion discussions, and at some point you do have to bake the cake. I mean, you got all the ingredients. You can't just keep meeting and meeting and meeting. And so what she's saying is this is what they've come up with. But there is someone in the audience who knows a lot about community engagement. David Plazas with the Tennessean is here.
Thank you very much. David Plazas. Last year I wrote a series on affordable housing and quality of life, and I spent my first year here writing a bus once a week for a whole year to really get to know the transit system. And what I'm finding is that the angst that I'm hearing here is, what's my place in Nashville? Where do I belong? Can I afford this? Will I have a place here? Because we see this displacement. One of the things that I'm hearing a lot when I get letters from people who talk about alternative plans is they may not have the context to know that 2/3 of the bus ridership is low-income people, individuals. And I've always been concerned about the ridership, the culture of ridership. It's a question I ask at every forum. Steve Bland and I have talked about it. I know Jeff Carr had addressed it at a recent debate that we had. And the question is, are you willing to ride with someone who is not like you, who is not of your income level, who is not of your race? Because we have these serious issues of income and racial segregation in our city that we have to contend with. And this is one of the conversations that I definitely would love to explore with both sides, because the fact is we have been an unequal city, and we're not alone. This is across America. The wealth gap is getting larger and larger, and there's a question of, if we don't have a dedicated source of funding this time, will we have one the next time? On the other hand, is this something that we can afford? And I think these are legitimate questions. One of the things that I'm most concerned about is the tone of the debate that I've seen, which is, you've seen especially on social media, people attacking messengers just because they have a different viewpoint. What can we do to have a civil conversation where we can say, okay, I agree with you or I disagree with you, but I'm not going to consider you someone who is not worthy of my attention because you have this disparate point of view? One of the things that we're doing, we're in the process of trying to get briefed by different sides. We just saw Mayor Briley, and we saw Aaron recently, and we'll be seeing different sides from No Tax for Tracks and others to really try to understand this plan and provide some recommendations for the voters to think about. At the end of the day, I recommend that people become informed. Now, I will also agree with one thing that Mr. Bland said, which is this plan has been around for a while. I will tell you, if you followed this plan, there are no surprises. I mean, this has been around for some time, and I do realize that around election time, people suddenly wake up to what's going to happen, because it is a very serious commitment. It's a very serious expense.
So how can people push past that and know, so that we know that the decision on May 1st is representative of people really understanding this plan and not reacting to rhetoric?
I'm glad you asked me about it. I have a column coming out about this. And one of the things is have a common set of facts. Know what's in this plan. You don't have to agree with it, but know what's in it. And basically talk about...
And you literally read the plan
Yes.
on Facebook,
Yes.
I believe, live, for people who don't want to read it for themselves.
Exactly. So some of the concerns that readers have are concerns that are repeated very much, again, of misunderstandings about the law. For example, size, scope, and cost. People say, well, why isn't this a regional plan? And we tell them it's because it's the law. It's county by county. That may not have been the best idea, but that's what we have. The other question is the cost. We talk about the $5.4 billion in capital construction, but also the $9 billion in total financing interest, all these other things. We want to know the facts about when things get done. And so that's the first and most important thing. If we can agree on that, that's going to take us a long way. Number two, do not get into pointless Twitter feuds. They don't work. I've been in them. They're terrible. Sleep on your response before you respond. But at the same time, try to have these debates. The reality is we've got to have these conversations, because it is about the future of our city. The big pressure that we're seeing in terms of growth is there's going to be greater inequality in many ways. The question is, will this transit system at least bridge it from the standpoint of getting people from point A to point B? The pro side says yes. And we see cities like Seattle that have been successful at that. But there's a lot of uncertainty because Nashville doesn't have a history of having something like this. And that's something to consider.
Thank you, David. That's great perspective. I would like to know about the dedicated funding question, because I think we kind of skipped over what you were saying. So is there someone that can explain the dedicated funding issue and whether or not, what happens with that with these other plans? I think that was your question, correct? Is there anyone that wants to address that?
A lot of people are asking the question, can this plan be changed? And when I get phone calls, and we have people who are passionate about whether they want to invest this money for too many maybes, we talk about why this funding is dedicated. When people say, in an era where we can't buy copy paper for our school children, and when we have a shortage of affordable housing, and people can't make their rent, why are we talking about investing $9 billion on maybes and coulds? The word that appears maybe a little over 60 times in the 55-page plan. The chart that was up before, the red part, that money has not been applied for. It's not been guaranteed. It is a grant. So what we hear is this concept of dedicated funding. And we also hear some of the rumors, which I know are untrue, that if we don't do this now, then it's going to be 6 years, 8 years, 10 years. The number keeps going up. That's kind of the hyperbole that's going around. But one of the facts that we have is from the actual Improve Act, and that's why I wanted to read from it. Section 4 of the Improve Act says that if the referendum on the transit plan does not pass, then Metro Council can submit an alternative plan after 12 months. So this is what the law actually says. So we can make a decision and be informed, and even if it's passionate. People are passionate because we are going to be the ones in Davidson County paying for this for the next 50 plus years.
To give us a little bit of clarity on the economics, Dr. Getz is here from Vanderbilt. He's an economics professor.
I've been engaged in studying transit for 45 years since I've been at Vanderbilt.
Okay.
And I would simply comment about the level of debt that's showing in the chart. So this $3.5 billion of debt, the annual carrying cost of that at the interest rate used in the plan will be
Now, excuse me, that's the light blue section,
That's
right?
right, plus the TIFIA 6% in the orange.
Okay, the light blue and the orange.
Yes.
Okay.
So the carrying cost, amortization cost, the mortgage bill, if you like, on that annually is $241 million. If we tripled our current ridership, That would be adding 20 million rides a year. That would be approximately $12 per ride in capital cost alone, not counting operating costs or any other dimension of the cost. Just paying the debt service would cost us $12 per ride. It gives you a sense of the extraordinary cost that we're engaging in to go with the extensive light rail program. Current ridership is under $10 million a year across all of the MTA's programs. It's under $9 million on the bus program. And I think Mr. Bone said this week that his best aspiration was that we would triple the ridership. So that would put us out at 30 million rides per year. So that would be an addition of 20 into 240 million gets you to 20.
And what is the likelihood that ridership increase enough to compensate?
Ridership has been falling. Here in Nashville, it's been down each year for the last 5 years. We're down about 6% overall. Many southern cities that have been automobile-oriented, their transit ridership is down by 20%
And
since
Dr.
a
Getz,
recent
are you
peak.
referring to all ridership or bus ridership?
Bus plus rail, so
Okay.
the total transit ridership.
So what does that mean? How are people getting around if they're stopping?
They're living closer to work. They're working at home. They're using alternative means of transportation. They are leaving scheduled conventional transit service in large numbers. We have a sense that our cities are gentrifying. Nashville is certainly gentrifying, so higher income people are moving into the middle of the city, and they are less likely to use transit with the frequency that lower income people have used transit heretofore.
Okay.
My understanding is that the right-of-way for these light rail systems are going to take traffic lanes away from automobile traffic. Is that true?
Are they taking traffic lanes away or adding traffic lanes?
Now, where would I get that?
Adding.
idea? So there's going to be additional property that's going to be obtained through probably eminent domain that will provide right-of-way for the rail system. Is that correct?
The general guidance we've had in working with TDOT is to maintain traffic flow. So there wouldn't be a reduction in overall vehicle capacity. One of the things we did in a preliminary assessment is to look at the 5 corridors. The land is generally sufficient. There are a few pinch points that we need to deal with, but if you look at the high capacity corridor study we did, Murfreesboro Road, for example, if you go down Murfreesboro Road, you will see that there is significant median in the middle of that between those lanes.
That would not be true on Nolensville Road, I think.
Some sections of Nolensville do have that capacity, but for sure, and that's again part of that process. But I guess the thing I would add, and what Dr. Getz was saying, what we've also seen in terms of how people are getting around is, in about the last 10 years, about 111,000 more cars per day on our regional road network. So, and that trend isn't reversing.
While you're up, Mr. Bland, a question from Facebook. Tori Jones Venable, are you talking about the turning lanes? And if so, do you cut out and put in rail lines? Or if you do cut out and put in rail lines, how do people safely cross?
Actually, one of the features in the light rail corridors is we know a lot of these corridors are notoriously dangerous, particularly for pedestrians, but you also see much higher than average accident rates, vehicular accident rates, and largely it is that uncontrolled access. Mm-hmm. So one of the approaches is by making those intersections safer for pedestrians, for autos, as part of an overall corridor improvement process, improving sidewalks, improving our pedestrian crossings, improving our bicycle access, improving our connections to the connecting neighborhoods. So whether you drive, you walk, you ride your bike, you take Lyft or Uber, you use a connecting bus, those corridors function differently than they do today, but they function more safely, and they can also throughput more volume, which is really what we're talking about in these corridors.
It just appears to me from the study and from what you said that's justifying the light rail for the most part in those corridors is it's to connect with other counties that might join, okay? So we're really, and that 70% of the cost that's being borne by Davidson County taxpayers seems very disproportional in order to serve these other counties. Now, and I'm just saying, just from the standpoint of serving Davidson County, because that's where we live, right? It seems like if we make it better, if we take Davidson County people off the road, it's just going to make it easier for the people in other counties to drive in on the freeways. And so the other thing is that what would the putting rapid bus transit corridors in place of the light rails, what would be how would that serve for serving Davidson County? What would that not do that the light rail does for Davidson County?
In other words, why can't you just have the
why
rapid
can't you
bus
just have all rapid
transit
bus for Davidson County?
Well, largely it wouldn't attract anywhere near the ridership, Davidson County or otherwise.
The rapid bus transit?
Correct.
Okay. And why is that?
It doesn't have the feature of reliability that light rail does, and that's what 20,000 folks told us was the most important characteristic for them in trying to choose to use a mass transit system.
Okay. So how can we reconcile this human factor of human nature and things that have been raised about from David Plazas to others about and Dr. Getz, people aren't riding buses or they don't want to ride buses with people that aren't like them, and the fact that we've got to do something?
There's a collateral damage cost that for the last 3 years has not been addressed. I've been to a lot of the meetings, at least 70% of them, and the same question exists for me.
What is that?
Where is the research from Nashville Electric Service, Piedmont Gas, and Metro Water where the damage will occur in pipes that leads to all of the businesses and our homes based on construction, vibration? I'm not seeing that. That's additional cost to what the transit is going to cost for every homeowner, every business. And I'd like to know the feedback on raised prices for utilities above and beyond homes and housing and the rail.
The capital costs take into account any utility work that needs to be done.
Okay.
So if a sewer line needed to be replaced or a water line needed to be replaced, but as a utility customer, the thing I would add, so if we don't give the capacity, as Nashvillians told us through Nashville Next, of putting more density in areas like downtown Nashville or some of our key congested corridors, then what would the cost of utility customers be when Nashville Water or NES has to keep expanding infrastructure into what's currently farmland or forest?
Once you begin construction, especially for light rail, you're going to have a huge blasting component. We don't have any information from environmental protection to talk about the limestone and what it's going to take to get into the grounds. We don't have the U.S. Corps of Engineers.
So environmental impact of the construction and the
cost,
installation.
And the cost.
And the cost. So do you have data on that?
Costs associated with the construction of those lines are included in the project.
Do you have studies on the environmental impact?
Absolutely not. You don't do that until you're ready to construct.
There's so much unsurety when people ask questions and when there is pushback. I never mind if people push back on questions because people have a right to know, especially if we're going to be asked to invest their money. When you don't, when you say, I don't know and I'm not sure, it's like an investment and somebody brings you a pro forma and asks you to write $1 million check and you say, show me the projections, show me how I'm going to get a return on my investment, and show me that for 3 years. That's what you make the investment on. If somebody says to you, write the check first and we'll figure it out later because we just got to get the funding in place, any smart investor is not going to do that. That's the pushback that we're hearing from the city with the alternate plans, with the people who say I was not a part of the 18,000. They didn't come to my neighborhood. They had the charrette from 8:30 to 4:30 on Wednesday, and I was at work. All of these voices that we're hearing now, it's a unique opportunity. One great thing is there's so much more information and so many more questions that have been raised now on a mass level throughout Nashville that I firmly believe that there's absolutely nothing wrong with when people vote against this, especially paying attention to the last line in the referendum in the last paragraph. We have another 12 months where we can come back with a concerted will and create some plan that is equitable, that is forward thinking and not backward thinking, and that may actually happen in phases so that we devote this to what people are actually saying they need. And I don't think there's any harm in doing that and making that something that's fair and equitable for all of the neighborhoods.
Well, I think with any public project, it's important to look at two sides, the cost but also the benefits. So I'd just like to ask, how did the planners monitorize monetize the benefits, if you could compare the benefits to the costs, because just looking at the costs is not the whole picture.
All right. I'm going to let Aaron answer that question and also have a final word because we do have the vote coming up May 1st. And that's a fact. Whatever happens from that vote, Jeff has raised some other possibilities if things go in one direction, and I'd like you to talk about the direction you're hopeful for.
There have been a lot of questions that have been raised this evening, and I think that what I would recommend to people, there's obviously a lot of information on our website, but many people from the mayor's office, from Steve's team, are out giving transit talks to as many community groups that are interested in hearing about them. And when we're able to really, this is a complicated issue. There is not a silver bullet solution to our transportation problems. And if anybody is saying that, then they probably don't know what they're talking about. So we are able to present the plan in a way where we can walk through the process that we've been through to come to the conclusions that we've had and why we need to be investing in the system. We have looked at the benefits. One of the most tangible benefits is the jobs that it creates. It'll create 3,800 jobs over the 14-year construction period, which is equal to $3.6 billion in additional labor income just in Davidson County. And Mayor Briley and the Metro Council are very committed to ensuring that as many of those jobs as possible go to local Nashvillians as well as our disadvantaged business enterprises. But there's a lot of other benefits, if I could just name a few. 37% of our greenhouse gases and 85% of our smog in Davidson County comes from the transportation sector. And a lot of the asthma that you were talking about, particularly for children, is impacted by poor air quality in our region. This system will be equal to planting 1 million trees a year starting in 2033. So they're really, really strong air quality benefits and clean air benefits. As Steve mentioned, Nashville's actually a pretty unsafe town when it comes to traffic accidents per capita. Transit-oriented cities are 5 times safer than car-oriented cities. And we have data that backs that up, that we'll see fewer traffic accidents when this system is implemented. And one final one is access to opportunities. The system will be within 90% of all households in Davidson County that don't have vehicle access. And anytime you get on the bus, there will be 30% more jobs within a 30-minute trip time. We know that housing costs are going up in Davidson County, but not investing in transit isn't going to make Nashville all of a sudden more affordable. Being able to reduce cost burdens, housing and transportation are the two biggest costs on Nashville households. And being able to invest in transit and be able to create an affordable, high-quality transit system means that people will be able to reduce their cost burdens as families while also improving their access to opportunities.
Okay, thank you. So I encourage everyone in our audience and those who are watching and also those on Facebook to do your homework, because really this is accountability for us as voters to understand this. And as David Plaza said, this really isn't new. So if it's new to you, then you haven't done your fiduciary responsibility as a voter to prepare for the election. We need to be engaged. We need to understand what it is that we're voting on. And if you're in Davidson County, you should vote. Thank you all very much for joining us, and early voting on the Transit Improvement Plan is already underway. It began April 11th and continues through April 26th. The final vote is May 1st in Davidson County, and we hope this discussion has been helpful and informative. Thank our studio audience, thank our Facebook audience, and thank you for joining us. Safe travels.